Is that Flora? Under the blazing sun, I unexpectedly spotted my granddaughter, Flora. Flora was holding a watering can in one hand, drawing water from the park's drinking fountain. Her expression seemed somewhat desperate. "Flora, what's wrong? What are you doing here alone? Where's Mom?" At just 5 years old, Flora had no adults around her. For some reason, I felt a strong sense of unease at this sight. When Flora turned around and noticed me, her face looked like she was about to burst into tears. Her small hand clung to my sleeve, as if begging for help. "I'm bringing it to Mom. Mom, she said she needs water." She desperately tried to convey something. Her words left me certain that something terribly wrong was happening. Suppressing my growing anxiety, I decided to follow Flora. The house Flora led me to was stiflingly hot, with no lights on in the rooms. It felt even hotter inside than the outside temperature, possibly due to the lack of ventilation. Though I sensed something was off, I didn't have the luxury to figure out what it was. The moment I stepped into the room following Flora, the scene that unfolded before my eyes made me scream out loud. "Ava, what's going on?" "Ava, I am Joanna Sterling, an ordinary housewife. My husband, Sebastian, is in his 60s and has already retired. Our only daughter, Ava Ford, got married and moved to a neighboring town, so Sebastian and I were enjoying our quiet lives together. That said, Sebastian has always been the kind of person who can't stand being inactive. Even after retiring, he remained in good health, with plenty of energy to spare. He often complained that life felt aimless without work. One day, while watching a TV program about volunteer activities, Sebastian suddenly shouted, as if struck by inspiration, "This is it, Joanna, let's run a children's cafeteria." Both Sebastian and I love children. On top of that, Sebastian had always wanted to do something meaningful for others since retiring. It must have seemed like the perfect activity for him. Seeing the excited and joyful expression on his face, I couldn't help but agree. And so we started a children's cafeteria. Using grants, we renovated a vacant shop near an elementary school, focusing on creating a cozy atmosphere with careful attention to the interior. Although it's called a children's cafeteria, it's open not only to kids but also to people stopping by after work. Perhaps it was a good location, or maybe it was Sebastian's warm and welcoming nature toward everyone. But word about the cafe quickly spread. Now it's become a well-known eatery in the area. Of course, I'm one of the staff members. Sebastian, being skilled and passionate about cooking, collaborated with me to decide on the cafe's menu. Sometimes it's me in the kitchen, and other times it's Sebastian. As the cafeteria grew more popular, it seemed word of it reached Ava as well. Although we had told her we started the cafeteria, she had only teased us, saying, "You're not young anymore, so don't overdo it." But then, Ava asked if we could take care of her daughter, Flora, for her. Ava has a husband named Daniel. Daniel runs a small company dealing with trade-related office work and is reportedly very busy. Because of this, I've only met him a few times, including at their wedding and pre-wedding gatherings. Still, he left the impression of being a very polite and personable man. Since Daniel is often away for work and Ava works part-time, there are times when Flora is left alone. Flora, being only 5 years old, is still very young. Moreover, there were no open daycare facilities near Ava's home in the neighboring town, or within a feasible distance for drop-offs and pickups. That's why Ava asked us to look after Flora at the cafeteria when she needed to leave for her part-time job. Of course, we had no reason to refuse. On the contrary, It was a welcome opportunity to spend time with our adorable granddaughter. Flora was a remarkably dependable child. At first, she seemed a little shy, but as she grew accustomed to the cafeteria's atmosphere, she began to show her lively, energetic personality. Just like Ava, she also seemed to enjoy doing things for others, though who she inherited that from is anyone's guess. Whenever she had free time, she would help out by wiping tables or guiding customers. She was nurturing and often played with children younger than herself. Although she must have felt lonely without her parents around, she made many friends at the cafeteria. Flora, reliable and beloved, became a favorite among the children, and she always seemed to be having a great time. "Grandma, is there anything I can help with?" While I was in the kitchen preparing for the next day, Flora peeked in and asked with her usual cheerful voice. I couldn't help but smile as I nodded. "Let's see, how about sweeping the entrance?" "Got it. Leave it to me. You know, it's okay to just play. Right now I feel like helping. Besides, I enjoy cleaning, so it's fine." Flora, already familiar with the routine, grabbed a broom and dustpan from the cleaning supply closet and headed enthusiastically for the entrance. From the shop's doorway, I could hear Flora greeting the local customers and chatting with them as they praised her for helping out. Not only was Flora adored by the children, but she was also loved by the local community. Those peaceful, heartwarming days went on until one particular day, I received a phone call from Ava for the first time in a while. Ava, busy with parenting, housework, and her job, rarely had the chance to talk with us, even during the times she dropped off and picked up Flora at the cafeteria. Hearing Ava's voice over the phone gave me a little thrill, knowing I could have a leisurely chat with her. "Hi Ava, what's going on?" "Mom, thank you so much for always looking after Flora. It's been such a big help." "Oh, it's nothing really. If anything, we feel like we're the ones getting all the joy and energy from her. Raising a child is never something one can do alone, and taking care of our granddaughter has never been a burden for us. If anything, every time Flora comes to visit, it feels as though she brings more color to our days. Besides, knowing that Ava, who has grown up and become independent, relies on us makes me feel genuinely happy." When I said that, Ava sounded relieved on the other end of the line. But then, in an apologetic tone, she said, "About that, actually, we've finally secured a spot for Flora in daycare. So from now on, I won't have to trouble you and Dad anymore." "What?" I let out a surprised gasp. For a few moments, my mind refused to process what she had just said. But as her words replayed in my head, a sense of sadness began to spread in my chest. Before I realized it, I had blurted out my feelings. "That's a little sad." Ava chuckled on the other end. "Oh Mom, I'm glad you love Flora so much, but this is the part where you're supposed to be happy, you know. The truth is, Flora was only staying at the cafeteria because they hadn't been able to find an open daycare spot. Ava must have been searching diligently to avoid imposing on us any further. Though I wished Flora could keep coming to the cafeteria, I knew it wouldn't be right to hold her back for my selfish reasons. Although I felt disappointed, I knew there was no other choice but to accept it. "Well, make sure to bring her over to visit any time." "Thank you. I'll let Flora know." Ava sounded cheerful, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When I told Sebastian that Flora wouldn't be coming to the cafeteria anymore, his reaction mirrored mine. "I see, that's going to be lonely." Flora was the heart of our cafeteria. Perhaps I'm biased, but I thought of her as the face of the place. Regular customers and the children who adored her would surely miss her absence. Seeing me looking dejected, Sebastian gently patted my shoulder in encouragement. But this is all for her growth. Knowing her, she'll surely be just as loved at daycare. She might even become the star of the daycare. You're right. No doubt about it. Thinking about Flora's future, I knew we should be happy and supportive. I shifted my mindset and smiled in agreement with Sebastian. After that, Flora no longer appeared at the cafeteria. And to make matters worse, even Ava stopped reaching out to us. Though she said they had found a daycare for Flora, the lack of any updates left me worried. Was Flora still doing well? Was the daycare properly taking care of her? Because we had spent so much time together, I couldn't help but worry about my precious granddaughter's sudden absence. What's Flora up to these days? Before I knew it, I found myself muttering that question aloud over and over. Unable to suppress my concern, I tried contacting Ava several times. However, each time, she cut the conversation short, apologizing with, "I'm busy right now." Even when I asked her to let me know when she might have some free time, her responses were vague and evasive, leaving my worries unresolved. Daniel was said to be extremely busy as well. If both parents were that occupied, I wondered if Flora might be feeling lonely. And if Ava didn't even have time for a brief phone call, I started to worry about her health, too. When reaching out to Ava didn't work, I decided to contact Daniel instead. I aimed for the evening, assuming he might be finished with work by then, and called him. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hello, Daniel. Do you have a moment?" "Of course. What's going on?" Daniel responded in his usual polite and cheerful tone, showing no signs of exhaustion from work. Still, I didn't want to take up too much of his time. All I wanted was a brief update about Flora and Ava, just a word or two to ease my mind. Actually, I've been worried about Flora and Ava. Is Flora enjoying her time at daycare? Has she made any friends? And Ava, she's been so busy lately. Is she holding up okay? Once I started, I couldn't stop myself from bombarding him with questions. But Daniel replied in a slightly troubled tone. "Joanna, I appreciate your concern for both of them, but don't you think this might be a little overbearing?" "What?" The words left me stunned, and for a moment, my mind went blank. As I struggled to find a response, Daniel continued hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable but firm. "Ava has mentioned wanting you to dial it back a little. Please, just let them be. Everything is perfectly fine here, there's no need to worry." He was right lately. I had become overly anxious about Flora and Ava. I had already realized it myself, which made Daniel's words hit even harder. I was only worried about Ava, who seemed so busy, and Flora, who was adjusting to a new environment, but perhaps my concern had become a source of irritation for them. "I see. I'm sorry about that." In the end, I could only apologize before hanging up, feeling dejected. Seeing my disheartened state, Sebastian, who seemed to have pieced together the situation, gave a wry smile and said, "Don't take it so hard. No news is good news, right? Let's just give it some time and see how things go." Lately, Sebastian had been the one cheering me up more often than not. Though I was still shaken, his words encouraged me enough to put on a brave face. "You're right. I suppose I've been a bit too hasty. Ava is a capable, independent adult. While she might seek our help from time to time, she can firmly stand on her own. The least I can do is be there for her when she does ask for support." I told myself that it was enough to have heard an update about them, trying to convince myself to move on. 2 weeks had passed. As usual, there wasn't a single word from Ava. Still, I tried to heed Daniel's advice and not worry too much about the two of them. Besides, we had our work at the children's cafeteria to focus on. Throwing myself into the job helped distract me from the lingering pangs of loneliness. Today, I had come to a wholesale market in a neighboring town. It was part of our preparations for a new menu at the cafeteria. Recently, with the heat wave persisting, Sebastian and I decided to add a refreshing dish to the lineup. It's unbearably hot today, I muttered to myself, wiping the sweat from my brow with a handkerchief. The heat was particularly oppressive, making even a routine shopping trip feel like a Herculean effort. As the relentless sun beat down on me, I began searching for a cafe where I could cool off with a drink. If I didn't find somewhere soon, I feared I might wilt in the heat. It was then, as I quickened my steps in desperation, that I saw something utterly unbelievable. Is that Flora? Under the scorching sun, I spotted a familiar child. She was holding a watering can in one hand and drawing water from a park fountain. Her expression looked strangely desperate, almost frantic. Have I wandered near Ava's place? While looking for a cafe, I must have unintentionally ended up close to the apartment where Ava and her family lived. Seeing her for the first time in so long filled my heart with joy. But there was no adult in sight. Neither Ava nor Daniel was around, and Flora appeared agitated as she stomped her feet while filling the can. The scene gave me a sharp sense of unease. Once the watering can was full, Flora began running off somewhere. Despite my decision not to interfere too much, a terrible sense of foreboding compelled me to call out to her. Flora, what's going on? What are you doing out here alone? Where's your mom? Flora turned around and, upon seeing me, twisted her face into an expression that looked ready to burst into tears. She didn't answer my questions, but instead grabbed my sleeve with her tiny hands, clinging to me as if for dear life. Mom needs water. She said she needs water. Flora's desperate voice sent a chill down my spine. Her words confirmed my worst fear that something was very wrong. Suppressing the rising panic within me, I spoke as calmly as I could. Flora, can you take me to your mom? Yay. This way. Flora nodded vigorously and gripped my hand tightly, pulling me along as she broke into a run. I stumbled, almost tripping over my own feet, but managed to keep up with her. I knew the general area where Ava and her family lived, but this was my first time stepping into their home. The Ford residence, which Flora led me into, had a strangely dim and somber atmosphere. None of the lights were on, though it was daytime and not entirely inconvenient. The interior felt a little too dark and unfamiliar with the layout. I almost tripped several times. To make matters worse, the room was stiflingly hot. It felt as though no ventilation had been done for days, the air thick and heavy, hotter even than outside. Despite the growing discomfort and sense of unease, I had no time to dwell on it. The moment I stepped into the room Flora had led me to, I let out an involuntary scream at the sight that greeted me. Ava. What happened, Ava? There she was, Ava, collapsed on the floor. I rushed to her side in a panic and found her drenched from head to toe. It didn't take long to realize what had happened. Flora must have tried to help her suffering mother by pouring cold water on her. It made sense. Ava's body radiated an alarming heat when I touched her. She was burning up, unconscious, unresponsive to my frantic shaking, and her breathing was faint. What in the world happened to you? This was a life-threatening emergency. Fighting the urge to completely lose my composure, I immediately grabbed my phone and called for an ambulance. Please help. This is an emergency. The address is. I gave the operator the apartment name and room number and followed their instructions as best I could to stabilize Ava's condition until help arrived. When I described the situation, they suspected heat stroke and advised cooling her body down. I quickly ran to the freezer to find something cold. But, what? There was nothing inside. Not a single item in the freezer. Worse, the refrigerator wasn't emitting any cold air at all. A chilling realization struck me, and I flipped the light switch on the wall. Nothing. The switch made a clicking sound, but no light turned on. Recalling Flora's earlier actions, I twisted the faucet handle as a last resort. Nothing came out. No water. Both electricity and water had been cut off. I was at a complete loss. Nothing made sense. Flora, why couldn't Mom drink any water? Where is Dad? I tried to make sense of the situation amidst my confusion, asking Flora for more details. Clinging to Ava and sobbing uncontrollably, Flora managed to explain between hiccups. Mom and I couldn't leave. We were stuck here the whole time. When Mom collapsed, I broke the door, and that's how I got out. What? In other words, Flora and Ava had been trapped inside this room, unable to access electricity or water. Recently, the weather had been unbearably hot. While the evenings might have been cooler, the daytime heat inside a sealed room without ventilation must have been like an oven. Why were they subjected to such a situation? Who could have cut off the electricity and water, leaving them confined like this? A suspect came to mind, but the thought was too dreadful to accept. It's okay, Flora. Mom would never leave you. The ambulance will be here soon. Everything's going to be fine. I stroked Flora's back as she cried louder, trying to reassure her, though my own heart was heavy with worry. Shortly afterward, the ambulance arrived, and Ava was rushed to a nearby hospital. The doctor explained that Ava was severely weakened and had developed heat stroke, leaving her in critical condition. Thanks to prompt medical intervention, her life was saved. But the doctor mentioned that even a slight delay could have been fatal. Sebastian, whom I had contacted, closed the children's cafeteria early and came rushing to the hospital. Is Avi okay? Sebastian stormed into the hospital with a look on his face I had never seen before. His overwhelming anger made him confront me with such force that I had to gently calm him down, rubbing his back to ease his tension. She's stable for now. Her life is no longer in danger, but it's uncertain when she'll wake up. I see. Sebastian exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and frustration evident as he bit his lip in anger. Flora, exhausted from crying, had fallen asleep next to Ava's hospital bed. Sebastian, seeing the two of them, reacted with uncharacteristic intensity. He whipped out his smartphone with a fury that contrasted starkly with his usual calm demeanor. What the hell is Daniel doing? Isn't the electricity and water contract under his name? I'll get to the bottom of this right now. I watched Sebastian's anger boil over, my own expression tense. Indeed, all the Ford family's utilities and housing contracts were in Daniel's name, unless there was some kind of financial issue. Only Daniel could have had the authority to cut off their electricity and water. Sebastian spent the next several minutes pacing the hospital room, his phone pressed to his ear. But no matter how many times he called, Daniel didn't pick up. That bastard won't answer at all. Maybe you could try contacting his workplace. He might still be at work at this hour. You're right. I'll do that now. Sebastian nodded at my suggestion and contacted Daniel's company. This time, someone picked up after just 3 rings. Lowering his voice to avoid waking Flora, Sebastian also put the call on speaker so I could follow the conversation. I'm a family member of Daniel Ford, the president. His wife has collapsed, and I need to speak with him immediately. The employee on the other end responded that the president was currently overseas and could not be reached. What? What do you mean? Both Sebastian and I instinctively raised our voices in frustration. However, knowing that Daniel's job involves international trade, I tried to rationalize the situation. I told myself that his busy schedule and responsibilities might have coincided with this crisis by pure chance, even as the unsettling feeling in my chest grew harder to ignore. Just then, Sebastian's phone rang. The caller ID showed that it was Daniel. It seemed the employee had managed to get in touch with him and explain the urgency of the situation. "Sebastian, it's been a while." Daniel's usual cheerful tone came through the speaker as Sebastian answered. A voice that once seemed nothing but kind now felt chillingly eerie. Clearly, Daniel was unaware of the current circumstances. Sebastian seemed to think so as well, his voice strained and desperate as he spoke. "Daniel, Ava has collapsed, and the electricity and water at home have been shut off. Please, come back immediately and explain what's going on." But Daniel's response was unnervingly calm, almost robotic. "About that, I still have about a week's worth of scheduled work left, so I can't return right now." "What?" Sebastian's shocked voice echoed in the quiet hospital room. Neither of us could comprehend what Daniel was saying. Perhaps we didn't want to. Despite being informed that his wife had collapsed, Daniel showed no sign of surprise or concern, choosing instead to prioritize his work. As I sat there, speechless, Sebastian exploded in fury. "What the hell are you saying? What job could possibly be more important than your wife's life?" Even in the face of Sebastian's justified outrage, Daniel remained silent. After letting out a brief sigh, he abruptly ended the call without further explanation. Sebastian's patience snapped. Grinding his teeth in frustration, he redialed Daniel's company. "This is about your president, Daniel Ford. Is he handling some kind of critical task that no one else can take over? What's so important that he can't leave?" It seemed that the same employee who had previously answered Sebastian's call was now responding to his almost aggressive questioning. With a sigh, the employee seemed to sense something and explained that there was no urgent work involved, but that Daniel was out with a female colleague. "Well, that's the situation," the employee stated without a hint of remorse. The meaning of those words was clear, even without much thought. Sebastian fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. After apologizing, he ended the call, exhaling deeply and hanging his head in frustration. I too was left in a daze, feeling betrayed, and muttered, "I can't believe it. I never thought Daniel was that kind of person." A heavy silence filled the room. Fortunately, Flora, who had been sound asleep despite all the shouting, had not woken up. A few days later, we received a call from the hospital, informing us that Ava had regained consciousness. I couldn't let Flora return to the apartment alone, so she stayed with us during that time. Today, we closed the cafeteria early and headed to the hospital with Flora. "Mom, I'm so glad to see you're okay." Ava looked quite weak, but she managed to sit up in bed and hugged Flora tightly as she jumped into her arms. Flora, who had been holding everything in, began crying loudly. "Mom, Dad, thank you. I heard most of it from the nurses. I know about Flora and the ambulance. Thank you so much. It's the least we could do. But you should be more concerned about yourself. You were really in danger." I was moved, almost in tears myself, watching Flora reunited with her mother after all they had been through. Sebastian, too, had a soft expression, relieved at last. While Flora had been staying with us, she had continued helping at the cafeteria just as before. Though she tried to act strong, I knew she must have been filled with worry. Thinking about the person who had trapped Ava and Flora like this, I felt a surge of anger rising within me. "Ava, can you tell me exactly what happened?" I couldn't forgive the person who had put them through such an ordeal. Suppressing my anger, I asked, and Ava lowered her gaze, looking uncomfortable. However, she soon lifted her head and met my eyes with a determined look. Gradually, she began to explain the situation to me. It was 3 days ago when Mom found us locked in the room. There was just a little water and some snacks in there, so we managed to survive on that, but I mostly gave it all to Flora. And then, this happened. The bedroom they had been trapped in had no windows, and escaping was impossible. Ava must have endured hunger and physical discomfort with a sense of hopelessness. I bit my lip, urging her to continue. So it was Daniel who locked you in, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Ava nodded weakly. It seemed that they had not been getting along lately, just like our impression of him. Ava had believed Daniel to be a good person, but at some point, he changed. Ava hadn't known if he had always been that way, but she had started noticing his darker side over time. Daniel's always been away on business trips, never home. When he did come back, it was always in the middle of the night. At first, I thought we were just missing each other, but then he told me to stop visiting my parents. He even threatened to say I was going there to ask for money. I didn't want to burden Mom and Dad, so I stopped contacting them. But now I realize that he must have been hiding something he didn't want them to know. Now that I think about it, I remembered Daniel accusing me of being over-involved. At the time, Ava hadn't been in touch with us much, so I called Daniel directly. But by then, he must have already told her to stop contacting her family. Ava had been lying about being busy to avoid troubling us. His words about me being over-involved might have been meant to push me away. This kept happening, and when I found out that Daniel's company was on the verge of going under, plus the feeling that there was another woman, I thought I should just get a divorce. But Daniel would never agree to that. So I tried to gather evidence to quietly push for a divorce. But Daniel found out, and then I discovered he had taken out a huge life insurance policy on me, which led to a huge argument about whether we should divorce or not. When I woke up, I couldn't get out of the room anymore. As she recalled the events, Ava let out a bitter sigh. My phone contract was temporarily canceled, so I couldn't even contact anyone. What on earth? After Ava finished speaking, she fell silent, and I was left trembling with shock. Ever since I overheard Sebastian's conversation with Daniel, I had suspected this, but now it was confirmed. So Daniel was after your life insurance. Sebastian's voice trembled with anger. Ava let out a self-deprecating laugh and nodded, probably. Her tone was full of certainty that Daniel harbored clear ill intentions toward her. The room was filled with a chilling atmosphere, and Flora, who had been quietly watching us, must have sensed the seriousness of the conversation as she stayed silent. A few days later, Daniel returned to the country. I had asked him to go to the Sterling family, which was Ava's family home, so he didn't return to the apartment but went straight there instead. Even though Daniel knew about Ava's collapse, he never made any contact to check on her condition or Flora's situation before he came back. It's been a while, Sebastian, Joanna. I'm sorry I couldn't come earlier because of work. Daniel, wearing that deceptively kind smile, spoke in a calm tone. He handed over a box of sweets as a souvenir and politely entered the house, a gesture that would have left a positive impression on us before. But now we were no longer moved by his demeanor. Ava's here too, isn't she? I told her not to rely too much on her parents. What happened to Ava? Daniel, with the face of a concerned husband, asked about Ava for the first time. I remained silent as I guided him to the room. Then I glanced toward the shelf. There, I saw a photo of Ava in a frame, with a single flower placed beside it. For a brief moment, I caught a look of triumph on Daniel's face, as if his scheme had succeeded. "No, it can't be, Ava," Daniel cried out in a sorrowful voice, stumbling toward the photo frame. He knelt beside it, covering his face with his hands and hanging his head. "I didn't make it in time. I couldn't even be there for my wife's last moments. I'm so sorry. If only I had come home sooner." Sebastian and I watched in silence, but it wasn't out of sympathy. We were seething with anger at his exaggerated acting. "It's going to be lonely, but there are a lot of procedures to take care of. I'll make sure to take good care of the things you left behind." With those words, Daniel shook his shoulders. But none of us were fooled. We knew he wasn't crying. In his mind, he was probably already planning how to use Ava's life insurance money. I couldn't take it any longer. Staring down at Daniel, who was collapsed on the floor, I asked coldly, "Daniel, you've been talking about Ava this whole time, but don't you care about Flora?" Daniel quickly lifted his head in a panic, then hastily replied, That can't be. Flora is okay. Who could have done such a thing?" Realizing that Flora wasn't present, he began to look around the room. Since the apartment had no electricity or water, he must have known that if Flora were here, she'd be staying in this house. But then the moment came when Daniel's joy and schemes were exposed. "That's quite a bold thing to say." The door to the room opened, and Ava appeared from the next room. Flora clung to Ava's feet, glaring at Daniel with hostility. "Ava, what's going on? Why are you here?" Daniel screamed in surprise and collapsed, his knees giving way. He had no idea about the outcome of his plans. He hadn't realized that everything had been exposed, and that nothing was going the way he had hoped. His time spent carelessly enjoying himself overseas had kept him oblivious to it all. It seemed that Daniel had convinced himself that Ava was dead. Sweat poured down his face as he called out to Ava in a trembling voice, but her response no longer had any regard for her husband. "You're the one who misunderstood, weren't you?" "Unfortunately, I'm perfectly fine, and so is Flora." With that, Ava shoved her smartphone screen toward Daniel. What was displayed on it were several files from a voice recording app. In front of a visibly shocked Daniel, Ava began playing the recordings. Through the crackling sound, the voices of Ava and Daniel could be heard arguing fiercely. Among them were recordings from the day before Ava and Flora were locked in the room, as well as audio of what seemed to be regular verbal abuse and violence. Daniel's face turned pale. "Do you know what this is? That's when did you? Don't think you can get away with this. I'll sue you." "Go ahead and try. I'm planning to sue you for putting my life in danger, all for the sake of the insurance money." Daniel's previously pleasant demeanor shifted drastically, and he shouted at Ava with malice. But Ava didn't back down. Sebastian also intervened, as if to support Ava. "There's no escape. The police have already been called, with the audio recordings documenting regular violence, and Ava as a witness to being maliciously locked in the room. It would be easy to trace that only Daniel could have cut off the electricity and water." It seemed that Daniel had finally realized the gravity of his situation. His face contorted in panic as he clung to Ava. "No, wait, Ava, it couldn't be helped. My company's business is in jeopardy. If I didn't have money, you and I would end up on the streets. If that happened, we'd lose even our homes. We'd face days worse than death. So it's fine that you to kill me, right? Don't make me laugh." Ava dismissed Daniel's desperate pleas with a scoff. "By the way, Daniel, you knew your company was in trouble, yet you abandoned work and went overseas with a female employee to have fun. You knew about that too." as Ava pointed out that Daniel had gone overseas with a female employee under the guise of work. His face turned to one of shock and despair. This was information that could easily be uncovered by asking other employees. There was nowhere left for Daniel to run. "Stop mocking me. I know exactly what kind of person you are now. You'll pay for what you've done." With those words, Ava dismissed Daniel, and he seemed to lose the ability to speak. With his resolve shattered, he knelt down, and Flora stuck out her tongue at him with a bleat. When the police arrived, Daniel was arrested. It seemed that the irrefutable evidence Ava held had drained him of any will to resist. As he was taken away by the police, he didn't say a word. After that, Ava and Daniel's divorce was finalized. Of course, Daniel's actions toward Ava were deemed malicious, and he was held accountable for his crimes. It was later discovered that Daniel's company, which had been struggling, was burdened with a huge amount of debt. He had planned to use Ava's life insurance to pay off the debt. The company's president was arrested, and with no way to manage the mounting debt, his company went bankrupt. "Welcome. Have you decided on the menu?" Flora's bright voice echoed through the now peaceful children cafeteria. She was holding a notepad she had bought herself for helping out, stretching up as she worked hard to serve customers. Since then, Ava and Flora had returned to the Sterling family home. Flora, who had been quite popular, was welcomed back with joy by many of the regulars and children. Children cafeteria was busier than before, and Flora happily helped out every day. Her presence had become so natural that she could almost be considered one of the employees. "We should probably make Flora her own uniform soon." "That sounds good. I'll go ahead and order it." As we talked while looking at the scene in the cafe from the kitchen, Flora quickly approached us. She read from her notepad, beaming with a big smile. "Grandma, I took an order. Thank you. Now could you deliver a drink to Mom, who's working hard?" "Yep. Leave it to me." She took the coffee on the tray with a determined look on her face. Ava, who was helping out at the cafe, also renovated an adjacent empty room and started a tutoring service for elementary school students. After school, children could come here to study or enjoy a delicious meal. This place was bound to be used by many more people in the future. "Well then, I'll start making the omelet rice you ordered. And while I was at it, I'd treat Flora, who was working so hard, to a special dessert." Rolling up my sleeves, I set to work for the hungry children.
"Sarah, there's a burglary happening!" John, my father, shouted in a panic, not realizing that David and Jessica were in the middle of an intimate moment in the basement. He had mistaken their passionate encounter for a break-in and locked the two of them in the room. As John frantically reached for the phone to call the police, I quickly intervened and revealed the shocking truth to him. Upon learning the reality of the situation, John's body trembled with rage, and he decided to summon Michael and the entire family to the basement. I couldn't forgive those two for betraying me. I was determined to make them experience hell. Driven by years of pent-up resentment, I was ready to unleash my wrath upon the unsuspecting couple. My name is Sarah, and I'm a 29-year-old who just got engaged last month. My fiancé, David, was my high school classmate. Although we didn't interact much during our student days, we reconnected after starting our careers. David had joined the workforce before I graduated from college, and he became my mentor at the company, guiding me through my new role. "I never thought you'd end up working at our company, Sarah. You were a top student with a knack for science, so I assumed you'd pursue a career in that field. I had no idea you were interested in publishing," he said. David was incredibly attentive and dedicated to his work. He patiently taught me the ropes and always had my back whenever I made mistakes. Despite being the same age, he felt like a reliable senior colleague, and I couldn't help but admire his dependability. David, you've really changed. Back in high school, you were more timid and unreliable. But now, you're completely different. You're so dependable that it's hard to believe we're the same age, I remarked. When I first joined the company, I addressed David by his last name. He did the same with me, and no one could have imagined that we would become so close. Hey, calling me timid is a bit harsh. But I guess I was more introverted back in high school, so I can't blame you for thinking that, he admitted. Everything changed during the welcome and farewell party for new employees. By chance, David and I ended up sitting next to each other, and he struck up a conversation with me. We bonded over nostalgic memories of our student days and discovered that we shared similar interests. Before we knew it, we started hanging out for drinks after work, and soon enough, we were on a first-name basis. As we spent more time together outside of work, I learned that David had an even greater love for books than I had imagined, and that he once aspired to be a novelist. Remember how I used to sit at my desk and write during breaks in high school? I was working on a novel to submit to publishing companies, he revealed. His words triggered a memory of David being honored at a school assembly. The quiet young man who sat at the edge of the classroom had achieved such an incredible feat. It was impossible not to be drawn to him. I was honored at that assembly because my novel had won the grand prize, he explained. I had never been particularly interested in novels. However, the thought of that shy young man pouring his heart and soul into a piece of writing piqued my curiosity. I wanted to see the work he had dedicated so much time and effort to create. And so, driven by mere curiosity, I decided to read his novel. As I delved into the pages, my perspective was completely transformed. The captivating storyline and the masterful craftsmanship left me utterly spellbound. From that moment on, my perception of him completely changed. I abandoned my plans to pursue a career in science and set my sights on working for a publishing company instead. My twin sister, Jessica, who had been following in my footsteps to study science, relentlessly complained about my decision. Why did you give up on that major tech company, Sarah? Didn't you say you were considering working there? She questioned, her voice laced with disbelief and frustration. Unlike me, Jessica was a flashy and attention-seeking individual. She belonged to the popular clique in our class, and I often found myself serving as her plain and unremarkable sidekick. When you compare Sarah to Jessica, Jessica looks like a total catch. I overheard our classmates gossiping. I know, right? She's got a great body, and her face is so stunning that it's hard to believe they're actually twins. Sarah's not bad, but Jessica is just too cute to even notice her. Another chimed in, their words dripping with admiration for my sister and dismissal of my own appearance. If I had to choose, I'd definitely go for Jessica. Sarah seems more like a good friend than a girlfriend, you know? A third voice added, cementing my position as the inferior twin in their eyes. Day after day, I endured being compared to Jessica and treated with disdain. Even our parents favored Jessica for her good looks, and our mother, Emily, was particularly blatant in her preferential treatment. While I could only gain attention through my academic achievements, Jessica was showered with praise for the smallest of actions. A little help with household chores earned her glowing compliments, and a mere smile elicited gushing exclamations of how adorable. I found myself both envious and exasperated by the constant fawning over Jessica. The first time I truly recognized the stark contrast in our treatment was back in elementary school. Since Jessica and I shared the same birthday, we always celebrated together. Everyone would rush to congratulate Jessica, while my own birthday wishes always came as an afterthought. Emily was especially cruel in this regard. "Happy birthday, Jessica. Oh, and you too, Sarah. You should try harder in your studies," she would say, her words devoid of any genuine warmth towards me. While Jessica basked in the exclusive attention and congratulations from Emily, I was left feeling neglected and yearning for my mother's approval. Determined to earn Emily's praise, I threw myself into my studies with a newfound fervor. Miraculously, I managed to achieve a perfect score on a test, a feat that filled me with pride and hope. "If I show this to Emily, surely she'll," I thought to myself, my heart swelling with anticipation. That day marked our 10th birthday party, a celebration for both Jessica and me. I figured that if I showed Emily my test results before the party began, I might finally receive the congratulations I so desperately craved before Jessica could steal the spotlight once again. With my chest puffed up with excitement, I made my way to the kitchen, only to be greeted by a shocking scene that stopped me dead in my tracks. "Hey, Mom! Look at this! Jessica got a 90 on the test!" My sister's voice rang out, her tone dripping with pride as she waved her test paper in front of Emily's face. To my utter disbelief, Jessica had beaten me to the punch, presenting her own test results first. Normally, Jessica's grades hovered around or below average, so scoring a 90 was an impressive feat for her. There was no way Emily would pass up the opportunity to shower her with praise. And just like that, the congratulatory words I had longed to hear were bestowed upon Jessica instead, leaving me once again overlooked and overshadowed by my twins' achievements. "Jessica is such a hard worker. Maybe I should add an extra turkey to today's birthday party. Or is there a toy you'd like as a reward? We could go shopping for it on your next day off," Emily gushed, her eyes sparkling with pride as she lavished praise upon my sister. "Emily, I worked hard on the test too. Look," I stammered, frantically waving my perfect score in front of her face, desperate for a shred of recognition. But the moment Emily's gaze fell upon my test, the smile vanished from her face, replaced by a cold, stern expression that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't get carried away with something like that. Studying is the only thing you're good at, so it's only natural that you can achieve this much, right? What are you getting so excited about? You should consider a perfect score as the norm. Don't come reporting to me every single time," she snapped, her words cutting through me like a knife. Shocked and at a loss for words, I stood there, my heart sinking into the depths of despair. At the same time, a burning hatred for Jessica began to consume me from within. We were supposed to be twins, yet Jessica was praised so easily while I was treated as if my accomplishments were nothing more than a given, met with cold, dismissive glances. Why was I the only one who had to endure this kind of treatment? Frustrated and resentful beyond words, I couldn't bring myself to celebrate my own birthday, instead retreating to my room and crying my eyes out. In those moments of darkness, my only support came from John, our father, who had become a doctor. John had established his own medical practice around the time I entered middle school and continues to work as a physician to this day. "Sarah, just focus on doing what you love at your own pace. You don't have to listen to what your dad or mom say about your life, you know?" He reassured me, his words a soothing balm to my wounded soul. In the comforting embrace of John's arms, I finally let go of all the pain and sorrow I had been holding back, sobbing uncontrollably as I poured my heart out to him. As long as I had John by my side, I decided that would be enough. I resolved to stop seeking love and approval from Emily, steeling my heart against any further disappointment. It was in that moment of clarity that John's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Sarah, take a look at this. There were dandelions blooming by the side of the road. "Isn't that amazing?" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with childlike wonder. You see, John had a tendency to be quite out of touch with common sense. He would confidently point at a sunflower and call it a dandelion, or spot a coyote and shout about a squirrel sighting. He just had a way of being on a completely different wavelength from everyone else. But it was that very quirkiness that never failed to bring a smile to my face, even in my darkest moments. However, Jessica would always glare at us with envious eyes, unable to stand the sight of my happiness. She had a habit of coveting and taking away anything that belonged to me. Consumed by a fierce jealousy whenever I possessed something better than her. This ugly truth became glaringly apparent to me during my middle school years. At the time, I had started dating a boyfriend who was way out of my league in terms of his impressive qualities. He was academically brilliant and excelled in sports, the kind of guy I never thought would give me a second glance. When he confessed his feelings for me, I was so shocked that I thought I must be dreaming. "I fell for you because of how diligently you studied, even during breaks. While everyone else was goofing around, you ignored them and kept working hard. I thought that was really cool. I didn't want to lose to someone like you, Sarah, so I've been studying like crazy to maintain my grades," he admitted, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he shared his admiration for me. His words filled my heart with a warm, fuzzy feeling, and I couldn't help but fall even deeper in love with him. Thanks to his influence, I finally learned to embrace and appreciate the studious side of myself. I vowed to cherish and treasure our relationship, determined to make it work. But just as I was basking in the glow of our newfound happiness, Jessica had to come along and ruin everything. "I'm sorry." I kissed Jessica. My boyfriend confessed, his voice heavy with guilt and regret. His sudden confession left me speechless, my mind reeling as I struggled to process the words that had just left his lips. As I stood there, grasping for a coherent response, Jessica stepped in between us, shielding him from my inevitable wrath. "It's not his fault. I couldn't help but fall for him. I just couldn't let him go. So please, don't blame him. If you want to blame someone, blame me," she pleaded, her voice laced with a sickening sweetness that made my stomach churn. "No, Jessica, this is all on me. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I think we should break up," he interjected, his words twisting the knife that had already been plunged into my heart. The entire situation reeked of a poorly staged performance, a charade designed to mask their betrayal. Blinded by my own pain, I failed to notice the triumphant smirk that played across Jessica's lips as she reveled in my suffering. Unable to bear another moment in their presence, I turned on my heel and fled, my feet carrying me as far away from them as possible. For weeks afterward, I couldn't bring myself to set foot in school. The thought of seeing them together in the same classroom, of having to pretend that everything was fine, was more than I could bear. It wasn't until I had finally managed to regain some semblance of composure that I found the strength to return. As fate would have it, I overheard a conversation between Jessica and our classmates that shattered any remaining illusions I might have had. "Damn, Jessica's a real piece of work, stealing her sister's boyfriend like that. Who does that? That's just messed up," one of them remarked, his voice dripping with disgust. "But it pissed me off, you know? Like, how could Sarah, with her inferior looks, manage to snag such a high-quality boyfriend? It just didn't sit right with me," Jessica retorted, her words laced with venom. "I mean, Jessica's way cuter and prettier. That's the only reason I took him. If he had noticed Jessica from the start, there's no way he would have fallen for Sarah." Another classmate chimed in, her tone laced with a cruel amusement. "Dude, she's scary." I don't ever want to get on her bad side." A third voice added, a nervous chuckle punctuating his words. As I watched Jessica laughing crudely with the boys, a sense of utter despair washed over me. It was clear that she had never truly cared for him at all. Her actions had been driven by nothing more than pure jealousy, a spiteful desire to rob me of the happiness I had found. I tried to tell my ex-boyfriend the truth, to make him see the kind of person Jessica really was. But he refused to listen, instead choosing to confront Jessica with my accusations. From that moment on, until the day I graduated middle school, I found myself the target of Jessica's relentless bullying and harassment. I had hoped that graduation would finally grant me the freedom I so desperately craved. But just as I was beginning to allow myself to dream of a brighter future, a new wave of despair came crashing down upon me. Jessica, it seemed, had decided to enroll in the same high school as me. Despite her initial plans to attend a different school, she had somehow caught wind of my choice and, like a malevolent shadow, had followed me there. My ex-boyfriend, who had chosen to attend a different high school, had outlived his usefulness and been promptly discarded by Jessica. From that point on, I resigned myself to a life of mediocrity, going through the motions day after day with no real sense of purpose or drive. It wasn't until I witnessed David's unwavering dedication and passion that something began to stir within me once more. Thanks to his influence, I found the courage to pursue my dreams, and to my amazement, I was offered a position at the publishing company I had always aspired to work for. Emily was furious when she learned that I had changed my career path without her consent, but John's intervention saved me from being thrown out of the house altogether. As my savings grew and my relationship with David blossomed, I finally felt ready to break free from Jessica's toxic influence once and for all. With David by my side, I took the leap and started a new chapter in my life, moving out on my own and leaving the past behind me. And so, after 5 years of being together, David and I decided to get engaged. When I introduced him to my parents to seek their blessing, their response was even more enthusiastic than I had anticipated. Emily, in particular, took an immediate liking to David, and the two of them engaged in lively conversation, their laughter filling the house with a warmth that had been absent for far too long. As they chatted away merrily, Jessica sat in the corner, her eyes narrowed in jealousy as she watched the joyful scene unfold before her. From that day forward, David became a frequent visitor to our home. My parents grew to love him like a true son, and he was even invited to join our extended family gatherings for Christmas.
Why don't we invite David's parents and relatives too? My dad and mom love having a big, lively crowd around, so I'm sure they'd be thrilled,"
John suggested, his eyes twinkling with excitement. My paternal grandmother, who had been running a restaurant, had recently announced that she would be closing down the business that winter. As a final hurrah, the entire family had planned to come together for one last celebration, a Christmas party that would double as a tribute to my grandparents and all they had accomplished. Initially, David's parents had been hesitant to join, not wanting to impose, but with a little encouragement from my grandparents, they eventually agreed to come along. With David's relatives also in attendance, that year's Christmas party was a grand affair, filled with more people than ever before. "Do you think we have enough drinks? If we run out, I can always make a quick run to the store. Just make sure to tell David and the others not to hold back, okay?" Emily fretted, her brow furrowed with concern. "It's all right, Emily. I heard some of David's relatives are bringing plenty of their own drinks, so there's no need to worry," I reassured her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Having only ever had serious conversations with Emily about my studies, I found myself feeling nervous at the prospect of engaging in casual chatter with her. But as my relationship with David deepened, Emily began to take a more active interest in my life, and we found ourselves talking more and more. It was through these conversations that I discovered just how much of a worrier Emily truly was. Despite having meticulously planned every detail in advance, she would still find herself fretting and fussing on the day of the event, her nerves getting the better of her. Seeing this unexpected side of her helped to ease some of the tension I had always felt in her presence. On the day of the party, Emily was her usual restless self, bustling about as she made last-minute preparations. As I worked alongside her, she suddenly paused and smiled wistfully.
Come to think of it, you were always right there by my side, worrying about me.
She mused, her voice tinged with nostalgia.
What?
I asked, caught off guard by her sudden declaration. As I stood there, stunned by her words, Emily's expression shifted to one of bittersweet sadness as she began to recount tales from our past.
Even though I scolded you every day, you never let it get you down. You'd always come to me and ask, Mom, is there anything I can help with, while Jessica was off playing somewhere?
She reminisced, her eyes distant as she lost herself in the memories. You spent more time by my side than you did playing. I realized then that I was making you worry about me. I knew I was being cold to you, Sarah. I knew I was doing a terrible thing. She confessed, her voice heavy with regret. As Emily spoke, abruptly pouring her heart out to me while preparing the steaks, I listened in silence, absorbing every word. At first, I was strict with Jessica. She was the older sister, but she was always taking things from you, wasn't she? Your birthday presents, your snacks, anything she could get her hands on. I couldn't let her keep doing that to you. She explained, her eyes filling with a fierce protectiveness. There was a time when I was really hard on her. But the harsher I was with Jessica, the worse she treated you. She revealed, her voice trembling with emotion. Her words hit me like a bombshell. As I thought back, I remembered how, in the beginning, Emily would fix Jessica with a stern glare whenever she stole one of my toys. There were even a few times when she scolded her right in front of me. But then, at some point, it all stopped abruptly, and before I knew it, I had become the target of Emily's ire. Instead of trying to reason with the disobedient Jessica, Emily had chosen to restrain me, to keep me out of harm's way. She had taken advantage of my docile nature, she admitted, her voice heavy with pain and regret. I'm sorry, Sarah. I've been a terrible mother, putting you through so much pain and suffering. Emily whispered, her voice heavy with regret and sincerity. As I listened to her explanation and heard her apology for the first time, tears welled up in my eyes, threatening to spill over at any moment. Seeing my emotional state, Emily paused in her work and asked me to wait for a moment before disappearing into our grandmother's room. When she returned, she held something in her hands, presenting it to me with a tenderness that caught me off guard. As my gaze fell upon the item she held, the tears I had been holding back burst forth, streaming down my face as I struggled to comprehend the reality before me.
This is the first perfect score you ever got on a test, back when you were in elementary school. Do you remember? You went out of your way to show it to me on your birthday. I was so proud of you then, even if I didn't show it.
Emily revealed, her voice trembling with emotion.
You had never tried to seek praise or attention before, but that day, you took the initiative to express yourself. This test is a precious treasure to me.
She continued, clutching the paper to her chest as tears gathered in her own eyes. Keeping it at home risked Jessica discovering and potentially destroying it. So Emily had entrusted our grandparents with safeguarding this precious memento. Learning this truth, I finally allowed myself to break down, sobbing into Emily's embrace like a child seeking comfort. The realization that I had been loved so deeply all along. That Emily had been watching over me and supporting me in her own way. and the struggles she had faced as a mother, it all came crashing down on me in that moment. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for having the opportunity to hear Emily's true feelings before embarking on my own marriage. With the air cleared between us, I thought the Christmas party would conclude without any further incidents. As the festivities wound down and the guests began to succumb to the effects of alcohol, I noticed Jessica slipping out of the banquet hall, trailing after David, who had excused himself to use the restroom. A sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach, urging me to follow them, but before I could make a move, Michael called out to me, inviting me to join him for a drink. Unable to refuse his request, I found myself trapped, forced to spend some time indulging in beer with Michael and his companions. After a while, I seized the opportunity to escape when Michael and the others got up to refill their glasses, making my way out of the banquet hall in search of David and Jessica. To my surprise, despite supposedly heading to the restroom, there was no sign of them on the first floor. The third floor housed our grandparents' private residence, and the door was securely locked. There were no restrooms on the second floor, leaving only one possible location. Puzzled by their absence, I began to explore the area, my mind racing with possibilities.
So, what do you think? I'm the better woman, aren't I?
It was then that I heard Jessica's voice drifting up from the stairwell leading to the kitchen. The stairs by the kitchen led down to the basement, where the wine cellar was located. Jessica typically avoided alcohol, so what could she possibly be doing in the wine cellar? Moreover, I could hear another voice mingling with hers, indicating that she wasn't alone. Suspicion gnawing at my mind, I made my way down to the basement, only to be greeted by a conversation that left me reeling in disbelief.
David should just be honest with himself. Everyone else already prefers me over Sarah, so why fight it?
Jessica's voice echoed, filled with a smug confidence.
Wait, no. We can't. If Sarah finds out about this.
David's panicked protest reached my ears, his words laced with fear and guilt.
After everything we've done, you're going to back out now? You can't just let a woman like me go this far and then leave me hanging. Are you trying to humiliate me? Or maybe you're into the whole forceful thing?
Jessica taunted, her voice dripping with a dangerous allure. The voice I heard alongside Jessica's belonged to none other than David. Unable to process the unbelievable situation unfolding before me, I stood frozen in front of the door, my mind reeling with shock and disbelief. I knew I needed to see for myself, to confirm what was happening inside, but the fear of what I might discover kept me rooted to the spot, unable to muster the courage to push the door open. Gradually, the sound of Jessica's nasally voice and David's heavy breathing grew louder, and a wave of despair washed over me, plunging my world into darkness. The David I had trusted so completely, the man I had placed all my faith in, was no different from my ex-boyfriend in the end. He had succumbed to Jessica's scheming, just as she had planned all along. Faced with this harsh reality, any love I had felt for him evaporated in an instant.
In the end, David is just like the rest of them.
I muttered to myself, a hollow smile playing across my lips as I sank to the ground, my legs no longer able to support my weight. I had truly believed that David loved me unconditionally, that his devotion to me was unshakable, but here he was, so easily ensnared by Jessica's charms. It was pathetic, really, and I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. It seemed that no matter who they were, the moment Jessica entered the picture, men were helpless to resist her allure. No one truly cared about me, no one valued me for who I was. With that realization, a single tear slipped down my cheek, a stark contrast to the empty smile that still lingered on my face. Steeling my resolve, I slowly pushed the door open, confirming with my own eyes the scene I had already imagined in my mind. The two of them were so lost in their passionate embrace that they failed to notice my presence, their bodies tangled together in a sickening display of betrayal. Fighting back the bile that rose in my throat, I reached for my phone with trembling hands. Aiming the camera in their direction, I captured the damning evidence of their affair, recording every moment of their betrayal before fleeing the scene and locking myself in the nearest restroom. As I struggled to keep my composure, I silently congratulated myself for having the foresight to gather proof, my mind already racing with thoughts of what to do next. It was then that John emerged from the direction of the basement, his face etched with panic as he rushed towards me.
"Sarah, there's a burglary happening!"
he exclaimed, grabbing me by the shoulders as he blurted out his shocking revelation. Utterly baffled by his sudden outburst, I tried to calm him down and make sense of the situation, prompting him to explain further. "Emily said she wanted some wine, so she asked me to fetch a bottle from the wine cellar. I remembered we had some vintage wines stored down there. But when I went to the basement just now, I heard some strange noises." He rambled, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush.
"Our restaurant is closed, so I thought it must be a burglar who snuck in to steal our wine, thinking no one would be around. I locked the door from the outside to trap them inside, so let's call the police. I'll go tell Emily and the others."
John continued, his voice rising with each word. In his panicked state, John had failed to realize that the burglars he had trapped in the basement were none other than David and Jessica. But for me, this turn of events worked in my favor. Knowing that the two of them were now trapped and unable to easily escape, I stopped John from calling the police and instead filled him in on what I had just witnessed. Together, we returned to the banquet hall to share this shocking revelation with the rest of the family. An hour later, as David and Jessica finally finished their sordid affair and attempted to leave the basement, they found themselves faced with an unexpected obstacle.
"What the? The door won't open!"
Jessica muttered, her brow furrowing in confusion.
"What?"
David replied, his voice laced with a growing sense of unease. Realizing that they had been locked inside, the two of them began to panic, their voices rising in a frantic cacophony of fear and desperation. Seizing the moment, I flung the door open with a force that startled them both, my eyes blazing with a fury that could no longer be contained.
"David, what the hell do you think you're doing?"
As the two of them emerged from the wine cellar, they were greeted by the sight of Michael and the rest of the family, all glaring at them with a mixture of shock and disgust.
"Dad? What are you doing here?"
Jessica stammered, her face draining of color as she took in the sea of angry faces before her.
"Don't give me that bullshit. What the hell were you doing in there?"
Michael roared, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Judging by their ashen faces, it was clear that neither Jessica nor David had anticipated the entire family gathering outside the room the moment they stepped out. Unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation, they simply stood there, opening and closing their mouths like fish out of water, unable to utter a single word in their defense.
"How do you plan on explaining this situation? Don't even think about trying to claim that nothing happened, because we won't buy it,"
I said coldly, my words cutting through the tense silence like a knife. At the sound of my voice, Jessica's head snapped in my direction, her eyes narrowing into a venomous glare.
"What the hell is going on here? Are you the one who locked us in the wine cellar?"
she demanded, her tone dripping with accusation, as if I were the villain in this twisted scenario. Despite the anger bubbling up inside me at her audacity to play the victim, I kept my composure, crossing my arms and looking down at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Don't get it twisted. It was John who locked the door, not me. I only heard about the situation from him. More importantly, what were you two doing down here in the first place?" I questioned, my voice laced with a sickening sweetness. "You were cozied up together in the wine cellar for over an hour. Could it be that you were engaging in some suspicious activities?" I pressed on, relishing in the way their faces paled even further at my insinuation.
What? What the hell are you talking about? Stop making baseless accusations. David mentioned he was interested in wine, so I was just showing him around and unlocking the room.
Jessica stammered, her words tumbling out in a panicked rush as she tried to defend herself against my allegations. Hearing her flimsy excuse, a bold, fearless smile spread across my face as I stepped closer to her, my eyes glinting with a wicked satisfaction.
Oh, is that so? That's strange because I was under the impression that David hated wine.
I mused, my voice dripping with mock confusion.
What?
Jessica breathed, her eyes widening in shock as the realization began to dawn on her.
He tried it once a long time ago and couldn't stand the taste. Since then, he can't even handle the smell of it. He's even complained about it to my parents before.
I explained, my words driving the final nail into her coffin of lies. Trapped by her own deceit, Jessica began to panic, her face growing paler by the second as she struggled to come up with another excuse. Beside her, David was visibly sweating, his brow furrowed in concentration as he desperately tried to think of a way to talk his way out of this mess. Unwilling to let them off the hook so easily, I pulled out my phone, ready to deliver the final blow that would shatter any remaining hope they had of escaping this unscathed.
If you had been honest from the start, maybe things would be different. But since you're so determined to lie your way out of this, I guess I have no choice.
Do you know what this is? I asked, my voice dripping with a sickening sweetness.
That's...
Jessica gasped, her eyes widening in horror as she realized what I was holding.
What the...
David choked out, his face draining of color as he stared at the screen in disbelief. There, playing on my phone, was a video of the two of them engaged in their earlier tryst. Their passionate moans and cries of ecstasy filling the air as their faces were clearly visible in the footage. Faced with irrefutable evidence of their betrayal, the two of them completely lost their composure, descending into a full-blown panic. Reveling in their misery, I couldn't help but laugh at their pathetic display, my words dripping with a mocking provocation.
I thought you said you were just showing him the wine. What exactly is going on here? I'm just a dumb girl, so I don't really understand.
Hey, big sis, care to enlighten me? What were you two doing down here? I asked, my voice laced with a sickening sweetness.
No, it's not what it looks like. David forced me into it. He lured me down here and took advantage of me.
Jessica blurted out, quickly turning on David and painting him as the sole perpetrator now that she realized there was no way to deny what had happened. David, caught off guard by her sudden betrayal, opened his mouth to defend himself. And soon the two of them were engaged in a vicious back and forth, each trying to shift the blame onto the other.
That's not true. When I went to use the restroom, Jessica followed me and dragged me down here. She kept saying that she's liked me long before Sarah did and started coming on to me. She even started taking her clothes off on her own.
David shouted, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation.
I tried to refuse at first, but then she threatened me, saying, "Are you trying to humiliate me?" I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring myself to push her away, and before I knew it, things had gone too far.
He rambled on, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush.
I'm so sorry, Sarah. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. I deeply regret what I've done. Please forgive me.
David pleaded, tears streaming down his face as he begged for my forgiveness. Seeing him reduced to such a pitiful state, my expression twisted in pain, and the words I had been holding back finally spilled from my lips. I trusted you. I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heart shattering into a million pieces.
What?
David asked, his eyes widening in shock as he struggled to process the weight of my words. I thought David was different. I believed he only had eyes for me. I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of my shattered dreams.
I'm so sorry, Sarah. This is all my fault.
David mumbled, his head down in shame as he pressed his forehead against the ground, repeating his apologies over and over again, as if the mere act of groveling could somehow erase the pain he had caused. But with each apology that fell from his lips, I could feel my heart growing colder, the last embers of my love for him fading into nothingness. No matter how much he begged, I knew I could never bring myself to feel the same way about him again.
If you cared about me at all, you would have cherished me and resisted Jessica's advances, no matter what.
I said softly, my words laced with a bitter disappointment that cut deeper than any knife.
I only love you, Sarah. Please believe me. You're the most important person in my life.
David pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation as he reached out to me, his hands trembling with the weight of his guilt.
Shut up, you disgraceful piece of shit!
Michael roared, slapping David's outstretched hand away with a force that sent him stumbling backward. Michael was a man of unwavering integrity, fiercely loyal to his wife and utterly disgusted by infidelity and any form of promiscuity. The fact that his own son had stooped to such deplorable behavior was more than he could bear. With a face twisted in rage, he fixed David with a glare that could have frozen hell itself, his words dripping with venom as he tore into him without mercy.
No matter what your reasons may be, to make the person you claim to love suffer like this. You're a failure as a husband and as a man. Someone who can't even cherish one woman has no right to speak of love.
Michael bellowed, his voice shaking with barely contained fury.
That's right. Do you even understand the gravity of what you've done?
Another relative chimed in, their words laced with disgust and condemnation.
To think you could still utter such words after we've seen this. You've got some nerve.
A third voice added, their tone dripping with disdain. As Michael's family joined in the chorus of condemnation, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger and disappointment, it became clear that they shared his intolerance for deception and betrayal. Perhaps it was because Michael himself was so steadfastly against straying from the righteous path that he found David's weakness in the face of another woman's advances so utterly unforgivable. Faced with the full weight of his family's fury, David crumpled under the onslaught of their words, collapsing to the ground in a pathetic heap as he struggled to find the words to defend himself.
That's right. Even if I was the one who approached him, none of this would have happened if David had just firmly rejected me.
Jessica interjected, her voice dripping with a sickening sweetness that made my stomach churn.
The problem isn't that I made a move on him, but that he was too weak to refuse me. You should be reflecting on your own shortcomings, not blaming others. I was only trying to test the depth of your love for Sarah.
She continued, her words so utterly divorced from reality that everyone present could only stare at her in disbelief, their eyes wide with shock at the sheer audacity of her claims.
What the hell are you saying?
I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I struggled to wrap my mind around the utter nonsense spewing from her mouth. In response, Jessica reached out and grasped my hand, her eyes shining with a twisted sort of pride as she spoke, as if she truly believed she had been acting in my best interests all along.
Sarah, I'm so sorry. If only I had realized sooner what a fickle man David was, I could have spared you this heartache. I never imagined he could be such a spineless, pathetic excuse for a human being.
She cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy that made my skin crawl.
From now on, I'll be the one to find you a man truly worthy of your love. So promise me you won't fall for any more trash like him, okay? Just listen to what I say, and everything will be fine.
She continued, her words so utterly delusional that I could feel my patience wearing thinner with each passing second. Just as I was about to open my mouth to put her in her place, a dull thud echoed through the wine cellar, the sound of flesh striking flesh with a force that left everyone stunned.
Don't you dare pretend you were doing this for Sarah's sake. How dare you spout such utter bullshit?
Emily roared, her hand still raised from the slap she had just delivered to Jessica's face. Jessica stood there, her mouth agape as she cradled her reddened cheek, too shocked by the sudden pain to utter a single word in her own defense. But Emily was far from finished, her eyes blazing with a fury that I had never seen before as she continued to tear into my sister without mercy.
Acting for Sarah's benefit? Don't make me laugh. You've never done a single thing for her sake in your entire life. To think you could do something so despicable and still try to shift the blame onto others.
She seethed, her words dripping with a venom that left Jessica trembling in the face of her wrath.
No one is buying your lies anymore. I won't let you pull a stunt like this ever again. From now on, I'll be the one protecting Sarah. So do us all a favor and stay the hell away from her.
Emily declared, her voice ringing with a fierce protectiveness that brought tears to my eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen her unleash such raw, unbridled anger on Jessica, the first time she had stood up for me so clearly and unequivocally. Overwhelmed by the sheer force of her love and the depth of her commitment to my well-being, I couldn't help but choke back a sob, my heart swelling with a gratitude that I had never known before.
What do you mean? You're trying to act like a proper mother now after being so harsh on Sarah all this time? Just because the relatives are watching, you're putting on a good face. I'm the way I am because you pampered me, and I can't measure my worth any other way because you kept comparing me to Sarah. Stop acting like you're not at fault.
Emily, shocked by these words, looked taken aback, and John stepped in front of Jessica to protect Emily.
You're right, we might have raised you the wrong way. But did Emily ever say it was okay for you to do this? Do you think Sarah would be happy seeing you act like this? Every time you get scolded, you use someone as a shield to escape getting hurt. You're just a coward, always running away, blaming others. Everything you're facing now is because of what you've sown.
It was the first time John yelled at her, and Jessica, trembling in fear. I had never heard such a low, intimidating voice from John, who usually seemed out of touch with common sense. Even I was taken aback, and my tears stopped.
You've crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed as a human. You will be punished accordingly. Punished?
Seeing John's serious expression, Jessica trembled, wondering what he would say.
From now on, we won't take care of you. You are banned from contacting any relatives. There is no one in this house to help you anymore. Live on your own. Never show your face again. What?
Jessica was speechless at this unexpected statement. The relatives nodded in agreement with John's words.
I've already talked to everyone. You have no allies left. Pack your things and leave this house immediately. No, wait! I have nowhere to go! I don't care. If you're saying it's our fault for pampering you, then we'll treat you harshly from now on. So leave. Never come back to this house.
Wait. Please. Sarah, I'm sorry. I won't do this again. I'm reflecting on my actions. So please, convince Dad and Mom. Don't abandon me. We're the only twin sisters. I don't want such a sad farewell. Please, forgive me? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Jessica cried and apologized, desperately clinging to my sleeve. But my feelings didn't waver, and I shook off her hand.
It's too late to cry now. It's disgusting. I've never thought of you as my sister, not even for a moment.
What?
Neither you nor David should ever appear before me again. If you do, I'll make you see hell. And I'll definitely demand compensation in court from both of you. Don't think you can get away with this by crying. Wait. Please, Sarah. Listen to me.
Hearing about the court compensation, Jessica turned pale and desperately reached out to stop me. But my parents blocked her path, and Michael and the relatives glared at her, all of them giving her cold stares. Seeing this, she seemed to give up, and with a powerless drop of her head, I left the scene. Thus, I ended my engagement with David and cut off my sisterly ties with Jessica. After that, I sued Jessica for compensation. As John declared, Jessica was disowned. She was also criticized by all the relatives, which must have taken a toll on her mentally. She didn't talk back. However, when it came time to actually kick her out, she seemed to realize the seriousness and kept begging for forgiveness in front of the house. But no one listened to Jessica's pleas, and the neighbors, disturbed by the noise, called the police. When Jessica heard the police sirens, she got scared and fled the house, seeking refuge at a friend's place. Learning about this, I decided to spread the incident among our classmates and acquaintances to further corner her. I gave her a taste of her own medicine. Consequently, those who knew the details stopped sheltering Jessica, labeled her as a person lacking compassion, and severed ties with her. Jessica is now reportedly living a poor life in the mountains of Dallas. David, too, faced cold stares from high school classmates and lost his friendships. Everyone treated him with caution, keeping their distance to avoid any trouble. Moreover, news of the broken engagement spread among his colleagues, making it awkward for him to continue working, so he quit his job in haste. Lacking any particular skills, he's now struggling to find a new job. However, I have no intention of forgiving him. I sued him for compensation, including the cancellation fee for the wedding venue I had booked, and with Michael's help, I now receive monthly payments into my account. Thus, I succeeded in clearing my ties with both of them. I left the apartment I was living in alone and returned to my parents' house, living happily with them. Hey, Sarah. How about this? I think it would look good on you.
Mom, I'm already 30. Just because I couldn't wear it as a child, don't bring clothes with teddy bear patches. Rather, where did you even find that? I'm surprised they make such things for adults.
Emily started filling in the lost time with me, and John smiled warmly as he watched us. Seeing the smiles of those two became my happiness. My name is Lily. I'm a 32-year-old working mother. When I first got married, I worked in customer service, but due to the impact of the pandemic, I became a target for staff reductions, and since then I've been working from home. I always preferred working alone, doing meticulous tasks over customer service or being in the public eye, and I enjoyed making accessories and stuffed toys by hand. However, these were just hobbies, and I never considered showing or selling them to anyone. But then, a friend posted my work on social media, which caught the eye of a shop owner who sold small items, and I got the chance to have my work displayed there. Eventually, reviews from the customers have increased sales, and now I can make a living from it. Unlike when I made things as a hobby, now I have to incorporate customer requests, deal with deadlines, and face other challenges, but it's far more fulfilling than doing a job I wasn't suited for. Despite this, I have some concerns about my family at the moment. It's about my husband, Ethan, and my mother-in-law, Rosie. Ethan was a salaryman, but after I started working from home and my business took off, he was influenced by it and suddenly quit his job one day. Without consulting me at all, he just suddenly quit. Naturally, I asked Ethan.
Why didn't you talk to me about this?
Ethan, with a serious look on his face, answered.
Seeing you shine doing what you love made me envious. I want to live my life without regrets too. I know it'll be a burden for a while, but please understand.
When he said that, I couldn't help but feel guilty for blaming him entirely. After all, when I was laid off from my previous job and had no income, Ethan covered our living expenses despite his complaints. With my current income, we could manage even if Ethan was unemployed. I reconsidered and said to Ethan, "Okay.
Take your time and find a job that you're satisfied with."
Showing understanding and encouragement. Since then, Ethan has been at home and started doing housework, which he never did before. Thanks to that, my work progressed smoothly, and I was able to take on more orders, gradually increasing my income. After a few months, our lifestyle of me working in my room and Ethan being a house husband became established, and I felt no discomfort or dissatisfaction. However, there is one person who absolutely doesn't like this arrangement. That's Rosie. She believes that men should work outside to support the family while women should support men and take care of the home. While this belief itself isn't bad, Rosie tries to impose it on us. She doesn't understand the concept of working from home and, no matter how many times I explain it.
How is that different from being a bum? You're just playing at home, so stop that and focus on housework and having children.
She refuses to understand. Even when I explained Ethan's current situation and that we wouldn't be able to live without my income, she just one-sidedly said,
Ethan has always been smart and capable, so he'll find a better paying job soon. It's your duty as his wife to support him to do that, but instead, you're getting a big head with this hobby like work and keeping Ethan trapped at home. It's your fault Ethan can't work.
It's tough to focus on work when she says such things over the phone or visits unannounced. When I complained to Ethan, he just said,
She's from an older generation, so try to manage until I find a job.
And didn't intervene. Even though I have no complaints about our current lifestyle, the stress from Rosie is building up, and I worry it might explode one day. Before doing anything else, I wanted to find a solution. As I thought about it, I began to worry about the future. What was Ethan thinking? Looking at Ethan now, it didn't seem like he was job hunting, and I wondered if this situation would continue indefinitely. But if I told him to find a job quickly, it might hurt his pride and lead to a fight. I couldn't say anything because I felt guilty about having an income and leaving the housework to Ethan. Then one day, Ethan said,
I found a job. I finally found a job I want to do for the rest of my life.
Ethan said with shining eyes. Seeing that expression for the first time in a while made me happy too, so I asked what kind of job it was. Ethan replied,
A web writer.
I was surprised and a doubt arose in me.
A writer? Can you really become one that easy?
Ethan had previously worked in sales, and I had never heard that he was good at writing. I had never heard of him having any connections in publishing or related fields. I had seen on TV that it was a popular job among stay-at-home moms recently, but I also knew that it took a long time to make a living unless you were a true professional.
It'll be fine. It seems tough at first, but once I get more projects, I'll start earning quickly. Like you, I'll be working from home, and being a writer sounds cool, doesn't it?
Ignoring my worries, Ethan was happily talking about the job.
Did you choose that job just because it sounds cool?
Ethan showed a displeased expression at my question.
So what? The reason doesn't matter. You started because you liked it too, right? Well, that's true, but
In contrast to the enthusiastic Ethan, I felt uneasy.
What genre of writing are you going to do?
Well, various kinds at first. Ethan's vague answer made me even more worried.
Don't worry so much. I'll catch up to your income soon,
Ethan said, giving a big smile and a thumbs up. Internally, I was exasperated, but if I said anything to Ethan now.
What, acting all high and mighty?
So, I said nothing. I was anxious, but Ethan's point was valid. It might be tough at first, but once he gets the hang of it, it could stabilize. I had experienced the same thing, so I shouldn't dismiss Ethan's chosen job. Maybe Ethan had a hidden talent in this field and would truly flourish. Someday, Ethan might be writing articles about my work. It might not just be a dream. In the midst of my worries, I found this faint dream and decided to support Ethan, but this decision turned out to be a big mistake. Without any preliminary knowledge or research, Ethan started, but he struggled even with short assignments, sitting in front of the computer all day, constantly frustrated. Of course, he didn't do any housework either, just sat in front of the computer, pulling his hair. Whenever I said something, he would snap at me, and I found myself watching his mood even in casual conversations. This meant I had to do all the housework, interrupting my work. Even so, I told myself that everything is tough at first, and once he got used to it, he would be more relaxed, so I didn't complain to Ethan. A few more months passed. Ethan's income, which was about $100 at first, started to increase gradually. Although it wasn't enough to live on, the fact that Ethan had worked hard was undeniable, so I praised and encouraged him as much as possible. However, from that time, Ethan's behavior became strange. About the project. Or, that client said. He started saying things like this more often than not, which are industry terms. He seemed to be acting like a seasoned writer. Mysteriously, condescending remarks from him began to stand out more frequently. Still, I figured everyone goes through phases where they get a little full of themselves, so I showed some understanding while secretly rolling my eyes and letting it slide. If it had been just that, it would have been cute, but Rosie's grand misunderstanding started and her harassment towards me escalated.
You know, Ethan is really amazing. He's able to get results in such a short period of time,
she said triumphantly to me. Sure, he started working, but was it really something to say with such a face? But then Rosie's next words made me furrow my brows.
While you've been doing nothing at home, Ethan has already surpassed your income. You need to quit your job and start having children.
What? Ethan surpassed my income. I couldn't grasp the meaning of Rosie's words and fell silent.
It looks like you're speechless. You should be grateful to have a husband as capable as Ethan. Honestly, you're not cut out to be a wife,
she continued.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. Ethan surpassed my income? Did he tell you that?
Yes, he did. He's been crying about how hard it is to do all the housework every day.
If you can't take care of Ethan, give him back to me.
As I started to see what was going on, I decided it would be better to talk to Ethan instead of arguing with her. I nodded appropriately, gently ushered Rosie out, and waited for Ethan to come home. In the evening, Ethan, who had been out pretending to be a savvy writer covering a cafe article, came back. I told him what Rosie had said to me during the day.
What have you been telling Rosie? She seems to be really misunderstanding things.
When I said that, Ethan started to panic.
Huh. I'm not sure. Maybe I didn't explain it well?
Seeing Ethan's reaction, I was convinced he was lying.
You don't have to tell the whole truth, but it's hard for me when you make it sound like everything is my fault. Rosie hasn't liked me from the start, and I want you to clear up this misunderstanding.
When I said this, Ethan's eyes suddenly flashed with anger, as if he felt accused.
Shut up. Men have pride, you know. Can't you go along with a little lie?
Sorry. Startled by Ethan's sudden shout, I apologized reflexively. But Ethan said,
I'm feeling sick of this.
And stormed out. When did Ethan become like this? He wasn't always this difficult. He used to be a bit childish, but he never had such temper tantrums. Is it my fault? Did he hate that I left the housework to him? Did my higher income hurt him? But even so, I can't just quit my job so easily, and things won't change overnight. What should I do? I couldn't sleep at all, and Ethan didn't come home that night. The next morning, I heard the front door open and thought it was Ethan. But it wasn't Ethan, it was Rosie.
Oh, what? Have you been crying? Haven't slept?
You look awful. Seeing my face, Rosie said with a snicker. Where's Ethan? I was so surprised that I couldn't respond, as I thought Ethan had gone to Rosie's place.
Can't even answer properly?
Rosie sat on the sofa. Just then, Ethan came back.
Huh? Mom, what are you doing here so early in the morning?
Ethan looked surprised to see Rosie. I figured you haven't been eating well, so I decided to make you breakfast. I also brought plenty of side dishes, Rosie said, pulling out numerous containers from a paper bag. By the way, Ethan, where were you headed so early in the morning? Rosie asked, and Ethan, looking slightly flustered, replied,
Just for a walk.
Then, turning to me.
Right, Lily?
He added. Ethan's flustered reaction made me feel a growing sense of unease. When I didn't respond, Ethan tried to cover it up by overly praising Rosie's homemade treats.
Honestly, any decent wife would get up earlier than her husband to prepare breakfast. But look at you, with your puffy face, still in your pajamas, just standing there. Poor Ethan,
Rosie said smugly, glancing at me sideways. Then Ethan joined in with Rosie, saying,
Exactly, Mom, tell her.
Rosie's snide remarks only happened when Ethan wasn't around, and whenever I told Ethan, he would just laugh it off. But now, right in front of me, Ethan was teaming up with Rosie to insult me. And he was doing it with a carefree smile I'd never seen before.
Calling that hobby of yours work. You have no idea how different it is from a man's job. Right? I should have opposed this marriage. Mom, this is delicious. You're the best,
Ethan said loudly, deliberately, while shoveling food into his mouth, and Rosie lounged on the sofa as if it were her own home. At that moment, I felt truly miserable for the first time.
Hey! At least make some coffee. You really have no sense, do you?
The instant Rosie said that, something snapped inside me. I grabbed Rosie by the arm and forcibly pushed her out, locking and chaining the door. Rosie started shouting from outside.
Hey! What are you doing?
I stood in front of the door as Ethan tried to unlock it.
What was that about? Are you both enjoying bullying me? What's your deal? And where were you last night? Shut up. Just open the door. No! I'm talking to you. I won't move until you answer me. Shut up.
Ethan shoved me aside and opened the door.
What's wrong with you? You're a horrible woman. Apologize to Mom.
Even with both of them yelling at me, I kept my mouth tightly shut.
You've got to be kidding me. Think about what you've done.
Ethan spat those words at me and left with Rosie. As Ethan walked past me, I caught a faint scent of soap. It's over. The moment I said it out loud, I couldn't stop the tears. Ethan hadn't changed. He had always been like this, I just failed to see it. The fact that I earned more only highlighted his true nature. As for where Ethan was last night, a woman's intuition shouldn't be underestimated. I could guess. I didn't want to know, but maybe I needed to find out. I wanted to lie down, but I had a lot of work piled up. I washed my tears away with cold water and headed to my workshop. The next day, Ethan and Rosie showed up as if nothing had happened. Then she said,
"Have you reflected on your behavior?"
"Well, it doesn't matter.
Ethan and I talked it over last night.
I'm moving in today to live with you."
"What?"
"That's right. Moving in."
"Ethan's suffering like this is unfair, so I'll be here to supervise you."
"Right, Ethan?"
"Yeah. You can learn a lot from Mom about being a proper wife."
They looked at me, but it was as if they were talking to themselves, disregarding my presence.
"Is Rosie going to live here?"
"That's what I've been saying, isn't it? You really lack comprehension, don't you?"
"Listen, you were living it up on just $500 a month and taking advantage of Ethan, right? You're only able to stay here because Ethan makes $10,000 a month. You should be grateful to Ethan for your lifestyle."
When I looked at Ethan's face, he seemed to know he was lying and avoided my gaze. However, he smiled next to Rosie, as if to say he had an ally. Seeing that, I realized I couldn't stay with him any longer.
"All right. I'll divorce Ethan. Enjoy your life with him and his $500 monthly income."
When I said that, Rosie laughed at me. "Huh? What are you talking about?"
"Spouting such sore loser nonsense."
"Oh well. If you want a divorce, go ahead.
It's what I wanted all along."
Just leave." Rosie didn't notice Ethan starting to panic.
"Understood. Ethan, I'll contact you later about the proceedings."
I said this and packed a suitcase with some clothes and essential work tools.
"I'll be in touch." "Wait a minute."
Ethan hurried after me, but...
"Ethan, there's no need to stop her."
Rosie clung to Ethan's arm as I quickly left the house. It didn't take long for Rosie to learn all the facts. I promptly arranged for a lawyer and moving company and terminated the apartment lease. From early morning, movers started taking out my belongings, causing Ethan and Rosie to frantically call me one after the other.
"What is this? What's going on?"
Rosie yelled over the phone, but I remained calm.
"You said if I wanted a divorce, go ahead, didn't you? So, I'm just moving my things out. The apartment lease is terminated, so please leave by the end of this month."
"Huh? Why?"
"Why? Because the lease was in my name, I paid the initial fees, and I was the one paying the rent. The furniture and appliances were bought when we first got married, so I'll leave them for you."
Ethan took over the phone and shouted,
"Hey! You can't just do this. I supported you when you were unemployed too." "True, but it was only for a few months, right? I've supported you financially much more. I also turned a blind eye when you used my card for expenses and such. But this is outrageous. Pay me compensation." "Yeah! Pay us compensation!"
Rosie screamed beside Ethan, but thanks to my mental rehearsals over the past few days, I could speak smoothly.
"Compensation, you say? Did you think I wouldn't notice? I was aware of your affair. I have the evidence."
At my words, Ethan fell silent for a moment, and the phone was handed back to Rosie.
"You, with your lack of feminine charm. An affair? That won't get you compensation. It's not even a valid reason for divorce." "Rosie, Do you remember destroying my work tools, calling them worthless toys? And it wasn't just once or twice, was it? I've submitted photos of the broken tools, receipts from their purchase, and emails documenting the delays they caused to my lawyer. Do you still call them excuses?
When I said that, Rosie shrieked.
Just show your face. Come here right now. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Save what you have to say for the meeting. Looking forward to it.
With that, I hung up the phone. A meeting was arranged later. I braced myself, wondering what kind of expressions Ethan and Rosie would have after having cursed me so fiercely before. However, Ethan and Rosie had completely lost their momentum. Ethan must have finally understood the situation he was in. Rosie, too, seemed to have realized the reality of her supposedly brilliant son and kept her head down. As the lawyer calmly stated the facts of Ethan's infidelity and the conditions for divorce, Ethan suddenly collapsed onto the table and began to cry.
Please forgive me. I was just frustrated. You make more money than me and do what you love for a living. But I couldn't tell Mom, and I took advantage of your kindness. I just wanted to show off a little. That's right. Ethan did nothing wrong. You understand, don't you? A man has his pride. You get it, right? Please reconsider the divorce.
Beside Ethan, Rosie was dramatically crying with her face in her hands. It was obvious they were trying to gain sympathy. I knew all about Ethan's reckless spending with my card, his failed attempt to buy a luxury car in my name because he couldn't sign the contract without me, and the expensive gifts he bought for his affair partner. Hearing them talk about a man's pride after all that just made me laugh.
Rosie, you said that it was only natural for Ethan to cheat on me because I lacked attractiveness as a woman, didn't you? You even said it would be a blessing if we divorced. So why are you trying to stop this divorce now? Did I say that?
I don't remember. Rosie mumbled, avoiding eye contact with me.
It's about the money, isn't it? You're panicking because if Ethan and I divorce, your lifestyle will be unsustainable, right? You must know by now that the money sent to you was from my income. You just don't want to lose that.
That's not true.
I just want you to come back. It's too late to say that now. I can't forget the things you've said and done to me, and there's no way I can support you and your son like before. An apology isn't enough to forgive everything.
When I said that, Rosie finally raised her head and looked me in the eyes. As I stared straight at her, Rosie's face twisted in frustration and she looked down again.
Please, reconsider. I'll find a proper job. Okay? It'll be fine, right? You're busy with work, so it's better if we stay together, isn't it?
Seeing Ethan pleading with upturned eyes, I realized I had no feelings left for him.
We're past that point. Honestly, it's very disappointing. But I can't live with you anymore. I have many flaws and things I need to reflect on, but from now on, please cherish your beloved Rosie and live happily together as mother and son. That's what I hope for now. No way!
Glancing at Rosie, I saw her glaring at me. I didn't look away from Rosie and said,
Rosie, isn't it great? Not only did you get rid of the wife you didn't like, but you also got your beloved son back. It's truly a dream come true. I hope you find a wife who will do everything you want someday. Enjoy your life with your son, who thinks he's a big shot in the industry on a $500 salary. Now you can cook him delicious meals every day. You must be so happy, Rosie.
I smiled sweetly as I said this. I thought I heard Rosie mutter,
You devil.
But I pretended not to hear and carried on calmly. Thus, my divorce from Ethan was finalized successfully. Ethan sold the furniture and appliances I left behind and moved back in with his parents, but without an income, the relationship with his parents deteriorated, creating a tense living situation. Now that we're no longer together, I hope he will put serious effort into his current job to make a living. He was just relying on my income, but I'm sure he'll get serious when he's under pressure. I want him to get serious. With a heavy burden lifted off my shoulders, my work has become even more productive, and recently I've been getting orders from various places. Now, I can afford to hire an assistant and have started my own company. There was a bit of a commotion when my company's website and the social media managed by my staff received slanderous comments about my products and me personally, but it was quickly discovered that Rosie was the source of all the negativity. I considered hiring a lawyer to file a lawsuit, but I thought it would be more mentally taxing to deal with Rosie for a long time if I escalated the situation, so I settled for a warning. I want to believe it has been resolved, but if something like this happens again, I won't hold back. Rosie probably blames me for the situation she's in now. Thinking about her obsession makes me shudder, but it doesn't matter anymore. I'm now living a fulfilling life with my team. It has been a year since my daughter Nicole and her husband Jason moved in with us, and they have since welcomed their adorable baby boy, Matthew. Today is the day my mother-in-law, Michelle, will meet Matthew for the first time. My husband, Christopher, had gone to pick up Michelle and was just returning with her. I've brought Michelle home, everyone.
Oh, welcome, Grandma.
Nicole, who had always been very close to Michelle since she was a child, had been looking forward to this moment ever since she gave birth. We live separately from Michelle. Considering her age and health, I often feel uneasy about the future, but it was all out of consideration for Michelle's unique constitution. She has a natural sensitivity to the spiritual world, making it difficult for her to be around large groups of people, as she feels overwhelmed by the spiritual energy. Seeing her arrive, Nicole's eyes lit up with excitement. Encouraged by Nicole's eager expression, I walked over to Michelle with Matthew, whom I had been holding and soothing. Welcome, Michelle. This is Matthew. Suddenly, she clutched her chest and appeared to be in pain.
Michelle?
Just moments ago, Michelle had been smiling calmly, but as soon as she saw Matthew, her eyes widened in shock, and she collapsed on the spot.
What's wrong, Michelle? Are you okay?
It hurts, it's painful, that child is, no. She desperately tried to convey something. In stark contrast, Matthew remained innocent and smiled happily in my arms. My name is Elizabeth. I used to work as a nursing care worker, but now I am retired and live with my husband Christopher, my daughter Nicole, and her husband Jason. Our peaceful life as a family of 4 is fulfilling, but there are a few concerns.
I wish Grandma could live with us,
Nicole said wistfully as she sipped her coffee. Currently, we live separately from Michelle. Michelle is 91 years old this year. Given my professional background, the idea of not being close by to support her, or what to do if something happens, constantly worries me. Yes, but I remembered the time I had suggested to her that she live with us.
It's more comfortable for me to live alone and spend my days leisurely. That's her choice, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Despite being 91, Michelle is incredibly energetic. Her letters often recount her mountain climbing adventures. She told me before that she loves the mountains because she feels at peace surrounded by nature's energy.
Also, she seems to have a strong sensitivity to emotions, especially other people's feelings.
I shared a memory with Nicole while enjoying a slightly indulgent cup of coffee.
When you were still in preschool, there was a time when you went missing, remember? What? Really?
Nicole exclaimed in surprise. She might not remember much since she was so young then. But at that time, Christopher and I were frantically searching for Nicole, so much so that even strangers offered to help.
We called our neighbors and searched around the preschool and the neighborhood, but we couldn't find you anywhere. Christopher suggested we talk to Michelle. And then, your grandma.
Over 10 years ago, Michelle was much more energetic than she is now. When I consulted her, "That's really tough," she said and quietly closed her eyes on the spot. I wondered what she was doing, but there was something about her atmosphere that made me feel I shouldn't speak, so I remained silent. A few seconds later, Michelle clutched her chest in pain and said as if she was feeling it herself, "She's in a dark place. It's lonely and it hurts a lot." When we focused on searching dark places as Michelle suggested, we found Nicole, who had sprained her ankle and couldn't move, inside a hole near a nearby embankment.
No way! I don't remember that at all. Afterwards, when I asked her how she knew, she just said she could sense Nicole's fear.
After finishing the story, Christopher, who had been quietly reading the newspaper, looked up and softened his expression nostalgically. "Now that you mention it, I do remember that happening."
Wow, so psychic abilities really exist. Grandma, you're amazing.
I had heard from Christopher that Michelle had psychic abilities, but until that event, I didn't believe it. I myself don't have any psychic abilities, and I thought such things were just fiction. But Michelle's demeanor at that time certainly made me feel she had some kind of supernatural power, and since then, I've been able to accept her strange statements more openly. Because she is sensitive to other people's emotions, which is part of her psychic abilities, I haven't been able to strongly insist that she move in with us. If she has such sensitivities, living alone must indeed be more comfortable for her. Living with others might prevent her from relaxing and even harm her health. However, I can't say this current situation is ideal. I sighed deeply, wondering what to do. And my worries didn't end there. A year ago, after Nicole and her husband Jason got married and started living with us, our front door began getting spray painted with graffiti. It's been spray painted again. One day, when I went outside to do some weeding in the garden, I found the front door covered in noticeable graffiti. Erasing the extensive spray marks by myself was too much effort, so I decided to ask Christopher for help as usual.
Christopher, I'm sorry, but could you help me clean off the graffiti?
Oh, again? Just give me a moment. The frequency of the graffiti was quite high, and we still had no idea who was doing it. Our house had accumulated a set of tools for removing graffiti in a bucket. This time, it was just a random mess of paint smeared on the door, but sometimes there were clear messages of malice like "curse you" or "I won't forgive you." Who on earth could be doing this? I had asked our neighbors, but none of them had seen anyone doing the graffiti. Our house was well known for being vandalized, and sometimes when we didn't notice, neighbors walking by would knock on our door to let us know. As things stood, even if I wanted to invite Michelle to our house, it would be hard for her to relax. "I've got it, let's install a security camera." I had an idea while erasing the graffiti and suggested it to Christopher. We needed to take some action to solve this. Christopher nodded at my suggestion and installed the security camera that very day. Then, after the front door was vandalized again, we checked the camera footage. The time was early morning when most people were still asleep. The footage showed a man dressed entirely in black. Is this person?
Do you know?
It was hard to identify the person because of the mask and hat, but it was clear that they weren't an acquaintance. However, as soon as Nicole saw this person, her face changed color. When I asked if she knew him, Nicole nodded and said, "Probably. I think it's Brian Jones, who was in college with me. Before I started dating Jason, he confessed his feelings to me. I turned him down, but he kept pestering me after that.
Really?
Recalling those days, Nicole began to shake her shoulders slightly. Hearing the story, Jason, with a stern look on his face, gently rubbed Nicole's back in a comforting gesture. Apparently, the graffiti culprit's love for Nicole had turned into hatred, leading him to do such things. I don't know what happened between them, but Nicole is not the kind of person to toy with someone's feelings. The sharp glint in the culprit's eyes, along with a gaze filled with madness and hatred, made me feel a chill down my spine. Christopher must have felt the same thing because he spoke in a severe tone.
We should contact the police. Even if it's just graffiti, it's a nuisance, and it could escalate further.
Yes, let's do that. It would be too late if something happened. We had the video and several photos of the graffiti, so we had enough evidence. We decided to take this footage to the police. When we explained the situation, the police took it as a malicious act and gave the culprit a stern warning. As Nicole had predicted, the culprit was Brian, who harbored intense hatred towards Nicole and Jason. Brian's parents found out about his mischief, and he had to quit his current job and return to his hometown. After that, the graffiti incidents completely stopped, and we were finally able to feel at ease. However, the uneasy feeling inside me didn't go away. Shortly after that, Nicole's pregnancy was discovered. She had mentioned that she had no appetite despite not feeling unwell, and then we found out. I had already been informed over the phone, so I warmly welcomed Nicole when she returned from the hospital.
Nicole, congratulations. Thank you, Mom. From now on, you have to be careful about many things. No vigorous exercise, no lifting heavy objects. Take it easy with work and keep a relaxed mind. I heard that from the nurse many times.
Nicole seemed tired of hearing this repeatedly. But her joy was undeniable in her expression. As we talked about the future, the living room door opened. Looking up, I saw Christopher coming back from outside.
If you need anything, don't hesitate to rely on us, Nicole.
Christopher must have overheard our conversation from outside the room, as he spoke kindly. Standing next to him was Michelle, wearing a joyful smile. I had asked Christopher to pick up Michelle.
Congratulations, Nicole. Grandma.
When I shared the happy news with Michelle, she was very excited and insisted on coming over. Her enthusiastic voice over the phone had made me happy too, so I asked Christopher to bring her. Michelle grasped Nicole's hands, tears welling up in her eyes.
It may be tough from now on, but I'm sure a lovely baby will be born. I'm so looking forward to it. Good things come with long life.
Nicole smiled happily and nodded at Michelle's encouragement. It's wonderful to have such a cute baby, isn't it? Do you sense it with your intuition?
It's not intuition. It's just a little dream of mine.
When I asked this, Michelle winked at me in a playful tone. Yes, of course. Any baby would be adorable. While I was internally regretting my intrusive question, I suddenly remembered the graffiti issue. Oh, Michelle. You mentioned before that someone was doing graffiti on our property, right?
Yes, I did.
We found out who the culprit was, contacted the police, and there haven't been any more incidents. You don't have to worry anymore, so why don't we live together? Brian has gone back to his hometown, and the neighbors here are all kind and peaceful people. Michelle shouldn't have anything to worry about anymore. However, Michelle shook her head as if the idea was out of the question.
No way. I can't imagine living with a happy family like yours. I'm fine as I am.
But Michelle, your family too. I tried to persuade her, but in the end, Michelle didn't agree. After that, Nicole's belly grew smoothly, and without any major issues, she gave birth safely. The baby boy was named Matthew. He had a cute face, just like Nicole. I remembered when I gave birth to Nicole and realized that she had grown up to do the same thing I once did, which brought me to tears. Nicole seemed eager to show baby Matthew to Michelle right away, but I advised her not to overexert herself right after childbirth, so the visit was scheduled for a month later. Matthew is really cute. When I cradled him, Matthew smiled innocently. Today is the day Matthew and Michelle will meet for the first time. To help Nicole, who has returned home from the hospital, I try to be as involved in childcare as possible. Above all, the fact that I now have a grandson makes me incredibly happy.
Matthew already loves you so much.
I'd be delighted if that's true. Thinking that I've finally become a grandma fills me with deep emotion. While talking with Nicole and taking care of Matthew, Christopher came back with Michelle. Here they are, I've brought Mom.
Welcome, Grandma.
Nicole had wanted Michelle to hold Matthew since the time he was born. With Michelle's long-awaited arrival, Nicole's eyes sparkled. Encouraged by Nicole's look of expectation, I approached Michelle with Matthew in my arms. Michelle, this is Matthew. But the words never left my mouth. Because at that moment, Michelle clutched her chest in pain.
What? Michelle!
Michelle, who had been smiling so peacefully just a moment ago, widened her eyes and collapsed.
Michelle, what's wrong? Are you okay?
It hurts. It hurts so much. That child is not good.
What do you mean? Matthew isn't good?
Sweat beaded on Michelle's forehead as if she was enduring real pain. Her condition was clearly abnormal. Wondering what was happening, I looked at Matthew in my arms, but he just smiled innocently, amused by the adult's frantic behavior. We rubbed Michelle's back and tried to help her sit down, but her complexion didn't improve at all. I told Nicole, who looked anxious, to wait and led Michelle to another room, where she seemed to regain a little bit of her color. Sorry, could you let me go home today? Don't get me wrong, it's not Matthew's fault.
Got it. I'll take you home right away.
Although I felt bad for Christopher, who had brought her here, and Nicole, who had been looking forward to today, I couldn't leave Michelle suffering like this. So, I decided to drive Michelle home as she had requested.
Michelle, are you feeling any better?
Yes, I'm much better now. I'm sorry. Michelle's house is in a place that feels almost at the foot of a mountain, a little away from the residential area. There are few houses around here, and not many people pass by, so Michelle seemed somewhat more relaxed, letting out a deep sigh.
It's okay, you don't need to apologize. But what happened earlier?
Michelle doesn't have any chronic illnesses. Yet she suddenly clutched her chest and started suffering, so there must have been some cause other than illness. I offered her some tea with relaxing properties as I asked. However, Michelle seemed reluctant to recall what had happened, averting her eyes and hesitating with her words. You know, when I looked at Matthew, I felt a very terrifying sensation.
A terrifying sensation?
Her expression was pained, and I had a really bad feeling. It's the same feeling that's been smoldering in my heart since we identified the person who vandalized the property and thought the danger was gone. The terrifying sensation Michelle mentioned must be due to her sensitivity to such things. If her sensitivity reacted the moment she saw Matthew. I suppressed my growing anxiety and called Christopher immediately.
Hello, Christopher. Could you and Jason look around near the house?
What's going on? He probably had been reading the newspaper. Christopher sounded surprised at my sudden request.
I have a feeling there might be someone suspicious around. I have a really bad feeling about this.
Understood, we'll do that. Christopher, having grown up with Michelle's sensitivity, understood even better than I did. He seemed to sense what I was implying, so he quickly called Jason, told Nicole not to leave the house, and stepped outside. I heard the sound of the front door opening over the phone, and my heart began to pound more furiously. "I'll call you if anything comes up on this end," Christopher said, intending to hang up. But the next moment, I heard Christopher's angry shout through the phone.
"What are you doing there?"
The sound of Christopher's hurried footsteps. Christopher and Jason yelling at someone whose voice I didn't recognize. And then, the unpleasant sound of metal scraping against metal.
"I won't forgive you. Nicole. You betrayed me and had a kid. Did you think you could be the only one to be happy?"
Through the phone, I clearly heard Brian's voice, not the usual calm Christopher, but filled with hatred.
"Christopher, what's happening? What's going on? Christopher?"
I clung desperately to the phone, but the noise made it impossible to grasp the situation. After those frantic sounds faded, the noises from the other side of the mobile phone eventually quieted down. When I was contacting Christopher from Michelle's house, he had spotted Brian lurking in the shadows of the house. And Brian was carrying a lot of knives. It was clear what he intended to do. Christopher and Jason confronted Brian, who seemed ready to lash out at any moment. Fortunately, Jason, with his martial arts experience, managed to subdue Brian without anyone getting hurt. The police were called immediately afterward, and Brian was finally arrested. As he was being arrested,
"Nicole, it's all your fault, you traitor."
he directed his anger at Nicole, revealing his resentment towards her.
"It's all thanks to Michelle. Really, thank you. If Michelle hadn't noticed, who knows what would have happened."
After things settled down, I visited Michelle's house again. The fact that Nicole and Matthew were safe was largely due to Michelle. The pain Michelle felt at that moment was the intense hatred Brian had towards Matthew. When I brought a cake to thank her, Michelle, as usual, downplayed her role.
"You're exaggerating."
She shrugged.
"I didn't do anything. It was Elizabeth who managed everything, and everyone else who caught the culprit."
"No, that's not true. If you say it was thanks to everyone, then that everyone includes you, Michelle." I was truly relieved. The thought of something happening to newborn Matthew or Nicole, who was struggling with her first experience of motherhood, was terrifying. We comforted each other and felt relieved. However, one day when it seemed like the incident had settled down, the doorbell rang ominously. "Yes, who is it?" Given it was after the incident, I thought it might be the police or a mail carrier and opened the front door. But in the next moment, I regretted it. "Hello, we're the Joneses. Is this Nicole's residence?" There stood a couple with creepy smiles I didn't recognize. "Joneses. We're deeply sorry for the trouble our son caused. Why were Brian's parents at our house? How did they even know our address when we're not acquainted?" A bad feeling from that day ran down my spine. We came to apologize directly to Nicole and Matthew. "Could we please come in?" What were these people saying? I didn't want anything more to do with the perpetrator. And it seemed unnatural for Brian's parents to come to our house to apologize. The incident had just happened. Isn't that something that should be done through a lawyer or the police? There was no way I would let these two meet Nicole and Matthew. "I'm sorry, but she is deeply hurt. There's no way I can let her meet you in such a state. Please leave. Please, we just want to apologize." Brian's mom leaned in, putting her hand on the door I was trying to close. Her persistent calm smile made me feel even more terrified. "No, thank you. Your apologies mean nothing. If you truly care about Nicole, then please never get involved with her again." When I said this in a stern tone, Brian's mom's eyes widened in surprise. Then, suddenly, she raised her voice so loudly that it could be heard by the neighbors.
What? I knew I wasn't wrong. It's horrifying to think that my sweet Brian might have married such a rude person's daughter. To reject Brian, there must be something wrong with Nicole. She must have been toying with Brian.
Excuse me. I felt a strange chill run down my spine as I noticed the drastic change in his behavior, so I closed the door and locked it again. If they cause any more trouble, I'll call the police. Thinking that, I gripped my mobile phone tightly, feeling a cold sweat trickle down my back. Brian's parents continued to stand stubbornly in front of our door, but after a while, they seemed to give up and quietly left. I sat down on the floor, relieved. Even though the culprit was caught, it might still be too early to feel completely safe. I decided to share this with my family. Actually, Brian's parents came by today.
What?
During dinner, when everyone was gathered, I spoke in a tense tone. Nicole's face turned pale with anxiety, and Christopher and Jason furrowed their brows.
They insisted on apologizing to Nicole and Matthew directly and asked to be let in, but I told them to leave. That's unbelievable.
There was no sign that Brian's parents genuinely wanted to apologize. I just couldn't understand what they were thinking. They were simply eerie. Then, trying to lighten the dark mood, Christopher said firmly, "Let's move. It's not good that they know our address." I think so too. Although this place was very comfortable to live in, the fact that Brian and his parents knew our address was a constant source of anxiety. Even if everything is okay now, there's no guarantee it will stay that way in the future. Elizabeth, you've been worried about Michelle too, right?
What does that mean?
It was as if Christopher understood everything I had been concerned about as he winked at me. In this way, he might be quite similar to Michelle. Michelle, why don't you come live with us? After successfully moving, I came to visit Michelle's house again. This house was very quiet, suitable for spending the rest of one's life alone, but it felt a bit too lonely for me. The new place is surrounded by nature, and I'm sure you'll like it, Michelle. And besides, through this incident, I realized something. Until now, I had thought that I needed to support Michelle unilaterally. Somewhere in my heart, I saw her as someone to take care of. But that's not all. No matter the differences in our positions, our family can continue to help each other. It's more fun to be together as a family. Nicole and Matthew feel secure when you're around, Michelle. Relying on Michelle. That was my true feeling. When I said this with a serious expression, Michelle gave a gentle smile as if she understood everything.
Elizabeth, you're so stubborn.
So are you, aren't you?
Maybe so.
It somehow became amusing, and we laughed together. Being similar, we would surely get along well in the future too.
That's right. Taking care of Matthew might not be so bad after all.
Thus, the series of events came to an end, and Michelle began living with us in the new house. From now on, we would live peacefully and happily together, but no one yet knew that in the future, as Matthew grew up healthy and strong, he would become overly attached to Michelle, causing Christopher and Nicole to lament.